Thank you so much for coming this afternoon, especially in this inclement weather. We expect a full house, and I think that we'll have some people coming in, but we thought we should get started because we have a lot of ground we want to cover today. I'm Diane McFarland. I'm president and publisher of the Herald-Tribune Media Group, and it's my privilege to welcome you all today to the fourth in a series of Herald-Tribune Hot Topics. And of course, today our topic is the arts. The arts, of course, is one of our chief economic engines. It is a defining asset for this area, one of our largest industries. And so we felt it was a topic that was worth devoting some time to in this series. And today we want to talk about the state of the arts in the Sarasota region. We want to celebrate our successes and talk about opportunities and challenges ahead. The Herald-Tribune probably devotes more resources to covering the arts community than any media organization our size, and I suspect many much larger than we are. And that's because we recognize the role that the arts play in this community and how important they are to the people who live here. I like to say that Sarasota is full of people who could live anywhere in the world, and they choose Sarasota. And one of the reasons they do is because of the arts. So it's very important that the local newspaper recognize that. So we are very excited about the panel we've assembled, and I'm going to let your moderator introduce them. Your moderator is Tom Tryon. Tom is our opinion editor. Now that's a newfangled term for editorial page editor. And what it signifies is that we assemble opinion online now as well as in print, and Tom oversees all of that. Tom will celebrate his 30th anniversary with the Herald-Tribune in January. So that's a lot of institutional memory and such an asset for us to have someone with that tenure in that role. In addition, Tom is a local boy. He is from Palmetto, Florida, and he started with us as a reporter. He was also, and he always gets embarrassed when I go down this road, but he was on the championship Tiger football team at Palmetto High School back in and he will probably make references to the fact that the Tigers are back in the hunt for the state championship. So,
thank you. Thank you. Thank you, Madam Publisher. That's a very kind introduction, and everything she said is true. Thanks to Family Genes, there is no dye in this hair, even though I've been at the Herald-Tribune for 30 years. Very briefly, before I introduce our panel, everybody can hear? I always like to ask that. Good? Let me thank the New College staff and my colleagues at the Herald-Tribune for working on this event. They're the friendly folks in the back. Yeah. Before I introduce the panel, I'd also like to single out two of our arts writers, Susan Reif and Carrie Seidman. If you could stand very briefly and we'll do a nice wave. Shameless plug, you can see their work in the Herald-Tribune and artssarasota.com. I also want to acknowledge the folks from METV who are recording this event for future broadcasts on, I believe it's Bright House, Comcast, and Verizon. And to the rest of you, welcome. What a great crowd, as Diane said. It's a little tough weather here in Sarasota. So before we get started, a couple quick programming notes. Tonight's forum will be in three parts. We'll have a good discussion between our panelists about the state of the arts. We'll follow with some questions from me to a couple people in the audience. And then the best part, we'll finish with questions from the audience and, we hope, answers from the panel. We'll end promptly at 7 o'clock, I promise. The panelists have graciously agreed to mingle afterward in the foyer. And let's see, I've got a cue here, hold up the magazine. As a parting gift, we'll distribute copies of Celebrate Sarasota, the insert that appears in U.S. Airways magazines and was published in the Herald-Tribune on November the 27th, I believe. One final point, we ask that you remain in your seats so you don't get in the way of the cameras. And just remember, this is not the Van Wezel, so please don't leave early, okay? So. I'll bring your car up if you like. So, one more time, before I introduce the panelists, I do want to recognize that they represent only a fraction of the arts groups in our organization. You know, we're fortunate to have so many viable arts organizations in our region. We've got dance companies, community theater, dinner theater, theater troupe, museums, colleges, film programs, vocal groups, and the visual arts, which, you know, as we've been reminded recently, include really big murals. Now, the downside of this plethora of arts groups is that it's hard to give everybody a platform, but we've got a good panel, and here they are. First, I'll introduce my colleague, Jay Handelman. He joined the Herald-Tribune in 1984 as an assistant city editor and has been theater critic since 1986. He came to Sarasota from Washington, D.C., where he worked for United Press International. He's currently the chairman of the American Theater Critics Association and is on the board of the foundation of the American Theater Critics Association. And let's see, he will be an American delegate to the International Association of the Theater Critics World Congress in Warsaw, Poland. Graduate of American University in Washington, D.C., Jay Handelman. Thank you. Have a seat. As I do that, I think Mr. and Mrs. Handelman are in the crowd, so say hello, Jay's parents. Nice to have you here. Thank you. Next up, we have Kate Alexander. She's the Associate Director of Florida Studio Theater. That means, in her words, she ministers to the artistic needs of the theater in its many community and state educational programs. She's directed numerous productions and premieres on FST stages. This year, she's directing Next Fall and Jericho. She created the FST Theater School and has pioneered an acting training method for children, which serves as a foundation for the school, serving more than 600 children yearly. She's won numerous awards, and I think she's actually shared some with Susan Danis. Ms. Alexander has been a resident actress of the Florida Studio Theater for over 20 years. Please welcome Kate Alexander. Susan Danis, our next guest, has served as the executive director of Sarasota Opera for the past 11 years. During this time, the opera's board of trustees and staffing structures have been reconfigured to meet what she calls the ever-changing needs of the company. They've done a $20 million renovation of the opera's 1926 historic theater and has commissioned a new work from composer Darren Hagen, did I pronounce that correctly? And librettist Sandy McClatchy. That's in progress for the Youth Operas program. She's just completed a 6-year term as a member of the Board of Trustees of Opera America and holds the office of chairman of the Sarasota Convention Visitors Bureau. She's got a master's of business administration in marketing from the University of Hartford's Paris program. Welcome, Susan Danis.
I like my little my dangling chat.
All right. Next up, Joseph McKenna. He's the president and CEO of the Sarasota Orchestra. In 10 years with the orchestra, the organization has experienced unprecedented change, artistic transformation, an increase in the endowment by more than $10 million, and changes in naming and branding. Before coming to Sarasota, Joe was managing director of the Cedarburg Performing Arts Center in Wisconsin. He has been a music director, conductor, and assistant professor. He is a graduate of the New England Conservatory of Music with, I didn't know this until today, or until I got his resume, degrees in trombone, performance, and music education. Welcome, trombonist Joseph McKenna. Last but not least, Jim Shirley. He's the executive director of the Arts and Cultural Alliance of Sarasota County. He's a longtime Sarasota resident with extensive ties to the arts and cultural community. Prior to joining the Arts Council, he was director of development for the Powell Sailor Circus. Must have been an interesting job. He holds bachelor's degrees from the University of Central Arkansas and has more than 30 years experience in sales, marketing, and management. Please welcome Jim Shirley. There's a little better. Good? All right. Okay. I'm going to take moderator's privilege just a quick second here and tell you part of the reason that I wanted to do this gig. And one of them is that in high school, Diane mentioned my illustrious football career, but I also had this choir teacher who had this crazy thought that every kid in school, including football and baseball players, ought to learn how to sing, or they could learn how to sing. And one of my friends tells me that if anybody in the world could teach somebody how to sing, a fellow named Bob Dittman taught me how to sing. So one of my prized possessions that I pulled out of my thing today was this little blue ribbon that I got. First place, blue ribbon, first place, men's ensemble, Palmetto High School in the state competition for the state of Florida. So I like to think I dedicate this to Bob Dittman. He's in the great choir in the sky, and I'll always appreciate what he did for me. So we're going to start with a nice upbeat overture, and I'm going to show my musical skills. We're going to set the pace somewhere around allegretto, right? No, allegro. I'm sorry. So not this. We're going to go boom, 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 boom. In 15 seconds or less, Jay Handelman will go down the row. What is the state of the arts in our community?
Vibrant, strong, struggling, a lot of room for growth.
Great. Kate?
If we were going to say on a scale from 1 to 10, I would give it a 10, but with much room for growth.
Great. Susan?
Absolutely vibrant, absolutely more creative than we ever were, both on stage and off stage, and incredible potential.
Joseph?
At a dynamic crossroads.
All right, great. Wow, you guys are playing along. Jim?
I would say blessed with great leadership because they're doing more than you can imagine with what they have to deal with money-wise. So.
Great. All right. Let's use a couple quick facts to give the audience a picture of your organization. We'll start with Kate. Tell us a little bit about your budget, number of employees, number of patrons, and we'll go from there.
Our budget is about $4.6 million. We have fluctuating employees, 50 permanent, and we swell up to about 100, depending on how many artists and artisans are working with us. We have about 3,000 donors that give and give additionally to our company.
Great. Susan?
We are about an $8.5 million company. We have about 20 staff members, full-time and part-time year-round. When we hit high season during opera, we employ up to 275 people. We're at about 2,000 donor households, so to speak. So that's about 4,000 people in terms of patronage. And on a good season, we can sell over 40,000 tickets.
One. Joe?
Yeah, we're a $7 million budget. The orchestra runs 36 weeks through the calendar. Our education programs run for 11 months. We have more than 225 employees, full and part-time, across all the sectors, our music festival, orchestra, and education program. We perform in 4 to 5 different venues throughout Sarasota and Manatee County, and that's pretty much it.
Great, thanks. Jim?
And the Alliance is approximately just under $400,000 budget, about $350,000. We need more. We are 2 people plus a part-time person. And we have a membership of just under 1,000 people and a donor base that pretty well matches that.
Okay. Kate?
I just forgot to say that we serve 100,000 adults and 55,000 children yearly.
Yeah, terrific. Jim, back to you. The Arts and Cultural Alliance has undergone changes recently. If you give us kind of the elevator speech about what the council is and what it does.
Well, the council did go through a big transition, as many of you know, a couple of years ago. My board of directors is now made up of many of the leaders of the arts and cultural organizations, which has given us the opportunity to really focus on our major goal of advocacy. Why are we here? We're here to help create a strong community for the arts throughout the community, to help raise money and to set a position where legislation can hopefully develop money for the arts. And at the same time, as we have continued to grow and build this base, we're now looking at the ability to possibly expand our board to get some of the more traditional touches on there so we can get more and more community involvement in the arts.
All right. Tell us how much money you're responsible for distributing and how you do it.
Thank you. One of our major goals is to try to develop funding for the arts. And this year we were very, very pleased to be able to distribute just a little over $1.3 million to our arts and cultural organizations. A big piece of that comes from the tourist development tax for Sarasota County. We have a contract with the county to be the administrative body for that tax. And we also have funds that have been set aside through other contributions over the years that have been made to the Alliance. And our job is to try to increase that funding as we go.
Okay. Just for some perspective, I think we've had some stories. I think Jay's written about it. The state of Florida's allocations to the arts have decreased by about 90%, at least since 2007. And it's about $1 million, correct, as I recall, the state allocations. So in Sarasota County, through the tourist development tax, you're actually generating more revenue locally than the state is allocating.
Well, that's absolutely correct. In 2010, the state went from somewhere around 29 or 30 million to just over $1 million statewide for support of the arts. And Sarasota County was just over $1 million in support of our county arts. So we've been able to maintain that. We've got a great community support factor there. But when you consider a county like Sarasota that has the organizations that we have, a big piece of that 30 million dropped out of Sarasota County. And that's some of the things that these folks are dealing with.
Okay, so we're going to go to, go ahead.
Just to put something in perspective, all the organizations are ranked by committees, and I'm not sure the whole grant panel process, you all would know better. But a year or so ago, FST was, for example, was ranked highest in its category. And in years past, when the funding from the state was really high, it could have meant $250,000. And I think it ended up being about $12,000 that they got. So just think of the impact on these local organizations having that much less money, that in some cases there were things planned for years that got cut back, that they weren't able to complete projects that they were going to do because the state cut back on what was available. Yeah,
excellent point. So let's talk to the three directors here, Joe, Susan, and Kate. In light of these cutbacks, in light of some donor distress, where does that leave your groups? Particularly, if you talk a little bit about ticket sales and donor, the relationship between ticket sales and donors, and what you've been doing to try to deal with these circumstances.
Very interesting, just as a data point to start. My first year here 11 years ago, the grant that the orchestra received from the state was $140,000, and generally now runs around $7,000 to $10,000. So it gives you sort of a benchmark of over a decade worth of time, not only for the orchestra, but for all of the organizations and my colleagues that are running organizations. As far as the orchestra goes, about 40% of our revenue comes from ticket sales. We generate another 45% or so through donations and foundation grants. We rent the orchestra center for a range of activities, which also supplements that income stream. I think the big thing that the orchestra did in 2008 through our rebranding was a very courageous and appropriate look at who we are and how do we serve an ever-changing population. And just today, for example, the United States Postal Service is going through a dramatic investigation of itself with a 30% drop in mail, and what does that mean to staffing and how you deliver things. The orchestra's entire rebranding was really aimed at asking some courageous questions about our audience today, our audience in the future, how do they behave, what kinds of things will influence how they interact with our organization, and our branding and relaunch of who we were played, I think, a very significant role to helping the orchestra through this very difficult economic period. Little did we know that when we launched the brand just after Labor Day in 2008, it was 3 weeks later that the stock market took that dramatic tumble. And very fortuitous for us, that work proved to be not only courageous in its research work, but a defining attribute in our ability to manage these ever-changing times. So the culture at the orchestra is to recognize that through the tsunami of demographic change and technology and the redefined global economy, those things are with us for the immediate future and probably forever. We've built a culture where we have to recognize that we have to adapt and learn how to converse with that kind of a world. So that's been a really big feature for the orchestra and our ability to manage through these times.
All right. So you're not suggesting the cause and effect relationship between the rebranding and the fall of the stock market at all?
You know,
Or have you been blamed for it? All right, Susan?
Well, just to add to Joe's data point and tell you a little bit more about what we've all faced with the state, from another perspective, over a decade ago, Florida was third in arts funding in the United States, only to be bettered by California and New York, obviously two sizable states with lots of art. We are now 49th, only to be bettered by Alabama. Yes, so echo what Joe said, we had a #1 rating of all the arts last year in the state in our grant cycle, and we received $18,000. And similar to Joe, my grant used to be in the range of about $140,000 per year. So we've all had to rapidly adjust. We've seen a lot of the same thing Joe has from our perspective. One of my favorite quotes that often gets said is that the only thing more expensive than opera is war, and it's true. We get to have everything. We have the dancers, we have the actors, we have the musicians, we have everybody. And because we own our own theater, we were at our best probably covering in the range of 52% of our costs from ticket sales, which the average opera company is probably in the high 30 percentile, so that's really quite good. And what we saw in 2008 was, as people who were really price sensitive or were on fixed incomes, they might not buy that whole subscription, but only buy two operas. So we actually saw a decline in our ticket revenues, but kind of, quite interestingly, an increase in our contributions. Our patrons who love our company were not going to let it fail. And so now we're kind of almost at a 45-45 equal split between earned in, from box office, program book, and things of that sort, and on the other side, contributions, foundations, and so forth. We very proactively in 2008 saw a change coming, so to speak, and we actually eliminated 3 positions, which were really tough to do, but we had to do it. They have not at this point been replaced. We just all do that work. We do not have an education director. We only have a part-time company manager, which when you're managing 275 people is a lot. And we really don't have a director of development. I get to do that as just a side job. And so we actually did take some tough internal cuts on the administrative side because ultimately you never want to touch your product.
Great, thanks. Kate?
I think we're all in the same place. I think we have to learn and have learned to be nimble. We lost a $500,000 grant from the state. It was devastating. We scaled back. We have several of our employees here, and everyone works really hard. We started to look at earned income and how we can make more. So we now have a 57% earned income ratio. We've always wanted to keep our model is a very affordable ticket price. That's where Florida Studio Theater lives. But yet, I think our public has stepped forward, and I think the one thing we would all say of the Sarasota public is when banks or foundations have really been hurt and can't give, the public has stepped forward. So if you get a ticket at FST for $15, there are people here today that say, I'm giving that extra 100, or I'm coming in, and we have heard that. So I think there's a generosity in this town that has stepped up, and we've all relied on that, as well as the nimbleness within our organization, and keeping an eye, as you said, on the art, and never letting that go.
Okay. Gonna maybe ask you, Kate, to talk a little bit about the niche that FST fills or has filled very impressively, and then we'll go over to Susan and Joe and talk about how you're dealing with kind of a more classical form of art and how you're addressing today's patrons and possibly future patrons. So Kate, if you could tell us a little bit about your target audience, maybe your place selection, and answer the question, do you think anybody else would present Hedwig and the Angry Inch? Which is a wonderful show, actually. It was one of my favorites. But.
It's great, yeah. Or the play about the baby, the goat. Well, we're a contemporary theater, and I think it's hard. We always expect the audience to define us. So There are so many avenues to Florida Studio Theater, but what I would say is we're contemporary, and we believe in a very ongoing dialogue with the audience. That the theater is its best, it's a talk, it's conversation. If we did an ancient play like Hamlet or, let's say, Ibsen's Enemy of the People, we would bring it into the modern context. We would say, what does it have to say about today? Because theater is like being around the campfire. It incorporates all of the arts, and we're talking. So if we are doing, let's say, this year Next to Normal, Unleashing Depression, still a very hidden topic, bipolar, very hidden topic in our world. We want it to come out. We want a conversation with the audience and a dialogue. Next to Normal or Next Fall. You know, how does religion intersect with preference, with somebody who is gay or gender? How does it interfere with their life? These are topics that need to be talked about and that are present in the community. Our audience, we want it to be affordable. We have an internal barometer, and it was in the paper, I think it was an odd phrase. We always say, we want the elite to meet the street. And what we mean is that everybody can come, that the service station attendant down the block from us, he comes to the theater. And so does his wife. She's a teacher, she brings her kids. And so does the socialite that's coming, and they sit next to each other, and they're in the lobby, and there's no divisions. And so I would say we're contemporary, it's a dialogue, it's very new, and we want a very raw atmosphere where the audience and the artists are together. We call it the dark breach, that space between you and us. We don't want it to be a chasm. We want to cross it. So we look for a kind of actor, a kind of play, that when you're out there, we're talking, and you feel it.
Great, thanks. Actually, we'll come back to Joe and Susan, because I wanted to ask Jay. Jay, you and I have talked about the range of theater offerings in our region and the different intentions of the companies. Could you share a few of those observations from your approach?
Yeah, I think it's kind of interesting that we live in a town that can support a theater like FST and a theater like Oslo Rep, which both major theaters, Oslo is bigger financially, but they approach what they do and do well in very different ways. I mean, I have a subscription to FST, and it cost me $10 or $12 a ticket, and the audience has a different reaction, I think, to what you do. You're more willing to forgive something if you don't like it. I know you mentioned The Goat and the play about the baby. I mean, there are plays that have raised some hackles over the years. And the Oslo is doing theater on a grander scale, and it's contemporary approaches to a broader range, I think, of theater. I mean, they're doing My Fair Lady right now, which is in some ways a big change of pace. I was just in New York last week for the opening of Bonnie and Clyde, which was a new musical set in the past that tried out here last year. And they did great productions of The Life of Galileo and 12 Angry Men, older plays that are given a new life, and doing Shakespeare and other classics. But those tickets are more expensive, and the top ticket for My Fair Lady, I think, is $65. And so the audience goes, I think, with different perspectives, a different attitude, and different expectations. And obviously, they're both finding audiences that are responding to what they're doing. And I know there is a crossover audience. There are people, everybody goes to both. And they have Friday nights where there's a problem of which theater am I going to go to, or the ballet or the opera as well. So, and that's a big change over the years since I've been here. I mean, they've really, I think, defined different niches for themselves.
And then community theater?
Community theater, I think, is pretty important here compared to other communities. I was telling Tom earlier today, I started as an assistant city editor here and was asked, I had expressed an interest to Diane, who was about to become managing editor then, an interest in being the theater critic someday, and I don't know what happened behind the scenes for me, but I was asked to do a review one night on my night off from my regular duties, and I was sent to the Players Theater to review a production of Light Up the Sky. And when I got to pick, and I just called and ordered tickets. I didn't identify myself from the paper. I got to the box office, and there was a stack of flyers asking the patrons to write letters to Bill McElwain, who was then the executive editor, complaining that for the first time in what was then maybe their 60-year history, the Herald-Tribune was not reviewing one of their shows. So Bill McElwain got a beautiful bouquet of flowers a couple of days later when my review came out. I got the note that went with it. But you know, it's part of our history, and we have long covered community theater here, and it's a starting place for a lot of people who have gone on to careers, who end up working at FST, or some of them have gone on to work at the Oslo or traveled the country. But there's so much a part of the fabric of this community. The Players was the first performing arts organization here. For theater, Venice Theater is basically it. And in Manatee, the Manatee Players is really a hub because there is no, and it's not like in Sarasota where there's so much else that's the thing. So they become very important parts of the community. All
right, and if you guys can hold off, I'll get to you in just a second. You were talking about, you know, community theater, FST, Oslo Rep, et cetera, et cetera. Mm-hmm. As a critic, do you approach reviews of those theaters differently, and how so?
I think my approach is the same. I think my expectations are different. I mean, I sort of have a sliding scale, I guess. I can't expect a community theater to do what a professional theater company can do. They don't have, I mean, it could be me on stage. I have to think about that. And there are times where I think I could do better than the people I'm watching, but, you know, I had my one little go at that a few years ago, and I know better. But I think that, you know, I expect more from the Oslo in some aspects than I do from FST because they've got the budget to have more lavish sets. And I don't, you know, if FST did a show with a huge lavish set, I would be almost shocked, I think, though next to normal in some ways. It's just a little scaffolding is kind of lavish for what they normally do. But there are, you know, so I have this in my head. I can't really explain what the standard is. But then I go to shows at the community theaters, and last year I just was blown away by Sunday in the Park with George at the Manatee Players. I could see it being done at the Oslo. It was so well done, and it was my favorite production of anything I saw last year because I was expecting more of a disaster. It's technically challenging, and it requires great voices. I mean, Stephen Sondheim, it's intelligent, and everything about it was just perfect for a community theater. If it was done at FST or if it had been done at Oslo, I might have gone into that expecting something more of it, and then I would have had to judge if it was delivered or not.
Great, thanks. All right, Joe, Susan, you're in charge of companies that perform classical art forms. How do you maintain your existing base of supporters, ticket buyers, donors, but also start to move forward to try to attract newer audiences, et cetera, et cetera? Susan.
Well, I, of course, have the most misunderstood art form that has the worst stereotypes in the world. If I see one more commercial with a very large woman with horns singing, I'm going to scream. So, and as an industry, we fight those stereotypes every single day. But there's one thing that opera has, and I think that regardless if you're a new audience member or if you're a longtime lover, which is the power of the human voice. And there's nothing that moves you, whether it's a conversation through a play or a ensemble that is sung or an aria. There is nothing that can grab you. When the hairs on the back of your neck stand up and you realize the person is how far away, they aren't amplified, they're wearing 50 tons worth of costumes under hot lights, and you are emotionally moved by the power of a human voice. That's, to me, is what connects to people as humans in opera. So if you can get people through all of the stereotypes of opera and actually get them to come in and to be open, whether it's to to symphony, or it's to a new play or an old play, that really is what, to me, develops an art lover. We obviously are doing certain things that are designed towards reaching into new audiences. Last year, we started our American Classic series. We're the only company in America that is dedicated to do one piece of our repertoire, so that's 1 out of 5 operas every year, is by a 20th century American composer. And last year we did Robert Ward's The Crucible. Great connection because people are familiar with it. Most folks have read it in school. This year, Samuel Barber, a composer many people know, Vanessa, and next year we'll be doing Carlisle Floyd's Of Mice and Men. Plays that have been done in our theaters, and also, so we're having that connection through literature. And I'm looking out at one of my trustees, who I won't identify, who said to me, I'm gonna hate it, I'm gonna hate it, I'm gonna hate it with The Crucible, and she came to me and told me she loved it. So the thing about, I think with opera, whether you're a new audience member or whatever, if you give it a try and you let that power of the human voice and the drama, stories are timeless, and if you let that connect and it connects with you deeply, it doesn't matter if you're 80 or if you're 8. You will come to enjoy that art form just like you come to enjoy many others.
Great, thanks. Joe?
Yeah, it's a really interesting question. Unlike the opera, the orchestra has much probably wider range of flexibility and deployment of what it does. I can honestly say that when we went through our branding work, the guiding principle really was quality. That whatever we embarked upon, if it was new or if it was something existing, we wanted it to be really, really excellent. And when the branding occurred, for example, some people were nervous that they thought the orchestra they loved was going away, and some people liked that perhaps there were some new gateways into experiencing the orchestra. The guiding principle really was quality. So we were able to kind of have that conversation. And today's public, and I'm reminded of this with my 2 young daughters, the cultural literacy palette today is far different than it was 10 years ago, than it was 25 years ago. And just as a sheer example, when we relaunched the brand in 2008, we weren't really talking about Facebook or Twitter or social media, and that's just 4 years ago. So one of the things that we really endeavored to do was 2 things. It was all about quality, and the second was the recognition that if the change on the outside is greater than the change on the inside, the end is in sight. And it was a very, very discerning principle for us as each meeting we had with the team, and we brought together, and the artistics team came together, and the administrative and research, but it was all guided by those principles. The world's changing out there. We need to learn to have a conversation with people that have a different cultural literacy, and at the same time, it has to be about quality. We're really proud of what we've done over the last couple of years in a very difficult economy. I compare orchestras, most orchestras, to like battleships. They're big, they're powerful, and they're slow to change. So we adopted the mantra of we want to have the might and the power of a battleship, but we want the speed and the agility of a PT boat, because that's what's required to interact with this much different cultural milieu that exists today. So those are the sort of the guiding principles, and we've applied that to everything. Our education program, for example, as a small thing, applying those same principles, working more closely. And I might add, we have 2 of the finest school superintendents in the 2 counties here in Manatee and Sarasota County. We have a great relationship with the 2 school districts as a result of their leadership. And we've seen a 70% increase in our summer camp enrollment from 2007 to this recent summer. Again, using those principles of quality and making sure our conversation that we're changing to meet the changes that are occurring on the outside.
Great. Just real quickly, because the orchestra has diversified its presentations. What has worked that's new? What has drawn new audiences? And maybe what hasn't worked as well as you had hoped?
It's a very excellent question. Our POP series, which we developed, we've seen subscriptions in the last 3 years. We had 200 POP subscribers 3 years ago. Then it jumped to about 400, and this year we have over 800. Next year, we're looking at doing double dates on the POPs. The sad thing for the orchestra is a lot of times when we develop something, because we don't have control of our delivery channel, we have to work closely with the city and the Van Wezel to get that extra night on 3 of those weekends to turn those POPs into double performance instead of singles. The POPs has been really strong. Masterworks has equally been strong. The artistic quality of the orchestra has been extraordinary. You know, sometimes we experience competition because there's so many things going on. Our Journeys to Genius series, which was really built on, which is a very courageous thing when you get a room full of artistic people and people that run orchestras together and say, you know what, we're gonna create this series based on what we learned in the research. And we heard things from focus groups that said, you know what, I don't want to sit in a concert for 2 hours. So we created that 1 hour format, or that 75-minute format without intermission. People are busy, people's lives are different. So if you can deliver the quality in a package that works for them, those have been some of our most significant successes as the Pops and the Journeys to Genius. Interestingly, in a down economy, they're the most expensive things to produce because they're built from the ground up. I mean, we start with a blank sheet of paper when we build a Journeys program. That's a whole lot different. Amongst the staff, you know, when I got here 10 years ago, we used to say, oh gosh, this is a Masterworks week, and everybody was bracing for how hard it was going to be. Now on a Journeys week or a Pops week, because of the technology and building the script and integrating video, it's a much more complicated endeavor. But those are some of the real successes. In a very interesting way, there haven't been too many things that have faltered. Because of, I think, that courage to change and that innovation, it's actually helped bring some of the other things along to be reintroduced. We had our best chamber music series last year and probably the last 6 or 7 years.
We have these little kind of little early preparation sessions where we talk briefly. And one thing that Joe and Susan told me was interesting about the nature of the people you hire, where they come from, and also we've had some discussions about, you know, is this a good place to be an artist? So let's talk a little bit about that if we can. Who's your typical employee at the orchestra? And I think it probably contrasts a little bit with the opera.
Yeah, you know, it's interesting. You know, our orchestra are 41 musicians that are considered full-time musicians of the orchestra. They live here year-round. They play in the orchestra the 36 weeks. They'll freelance. When the orchestra is not working, they generally get away in the summer for a music festival. But these are people that make up the cultural fabric of the community on a day-in and day-out basis. And interestingly, that's one thing that's really helped grow our education programs. When you have people that are here, and they're here for the entire year, you can call upon them to diversify and strengthen your educational offerings. So, you know, the orchestra is very fortunate in that regard, that these are full-time residents contributing to the quality and the fabric of life here. And that's not that the opera isn't, but their model's a little different.
Yeah, so tell us your model, Susan.
So our model is that we help to generate that tourism tax. We actually obviously have a fall season now and a winter season. In the fall season, we're very fortunate that we get to work with the Sarasota Orchestra for our band, so to speak, but they're a little busy during season. So except for the folks that work backstage, our stagehands, which are members of IATSE, everyone who comes to Sarasota Opera comes from someplace else. And so we have the great pleasure of flying them all into Sarasota and or Tampa and housing them in the height of season. And it basically goes that we obviously cover the cost of their housing. So they actually come from everywhere. I think last year we had people from almost every state. So basically for the months of January, February, and March, we have to place people in turnkey housing places. We do own a 16-unit apartment complex close to the theater where our young singers stay, but when you have 250 to 275 people, there's a lot of spill. So we have musicians, and we have singers, and we have technicians, and they're all in Sarasota earning money and then spending it at Publix, at the dry cleaner, buying the newspaper, and really are huge economic drivers. And the point that I shared with Tom that I think he kind of had a little bit of a gasp was, where my real challenge when you talk about is this a good place for artists to live, I have to say, is this a good place for administrative staff to live? I can virtually post a job nationwide for an administrative staff position, for a marketing position or a development position, and not get an applicant. Because if you're young and you're on the top of your game, we all know how great Sarasota is, but if you're 30 years old, you might not decide that you want to come to Sarasota to begin your career. So my greatest challenge actually is in terms of making this look like a great place to come and live, and that we do in a myriad of different ways to actually attract our administrative staff.
Yeah, all right. I found that fascinating. But okay. We will get to questions from the audience, I promise, and not too much more time. Let's talk a little bit about how this area stacks up and maybe what the opportunities are. Our crack marketing analysis people at the Herald-Tribune found out that Sarasota, Braden, and Venice ranks #1 in Florida in per capita attendance for arts, the fine arts. That means 3rd in theater, 1st in art museums, 4th in symphonies or operas, and 9th in dance and ballet. So the question I have for everybody here is, how do we maintain that standing and or improve upon it? Who wants to start? Jim.
Well, I think that there's no simple answer to that. But if you see what makes things happen here, I think, you know, looking at the money that has decreased to help support these folks, I mentioned earlier when my answer was leadership. And if you've heard every answer they've given, it's always been about the quality of the product that they deliver. They've never backed off on that. The money has never affected that. And it's that commitment. And I'm probably the least likely guy to be able to run an arts alliance because I really don't have an arts background, but I have a business background. And what I see in these folks, and Susan and Joe and Kate and Richard, are people who are really strong business people. This is not just, it's art to them, and they do the fabulous job at the art. But they're good business people. They bring it to us. And fortunately, like any good business, you can attract a great following if your product is good enough. And that following sits out here in this audience and all over Sarasota and Manatee County, people who come here because they're looking for great art, great culture, and they know they can get it here, but they know also that they've got to support it. So it's really a community thing, and we have to continue to attract people here through our art offerings and through our promotion of this community as a haven of the arts to bring people here who will support it. Because we're not going to do it on tickets alone, and it takes lots of different types of contributions. So we need to continue to make sure that we position our region as the top region in Florida, and certainly one of the top regions in the United States, which it is for the arts. And that's why people come here. You know, we have an industry here that's called the wealthy retiree, and they spend a lot of money here too. All of you do. And you're here primarily because of the arts. You could live anywhere you want to. And as long as we continue to blend that into our economic mix, it's going to be important. But we can never, as Joe says, we can never let our guard down. We have to continue to work and focus on the things that will support the kind of art that we expect here.
Great. Joe?
You know, it's really, you know, Sarasota has been a very distinguished arts community for decades. You know, going back to the recognition, if you really believe the theory that demographic shift and technology and the global economy really do influence how people are thinking, and not only thinking but actually behaving. You know, I think the time, or relying upon that we're a wonderful arts community, people do have choices, and I think we can't allow ourselves to atrophy. We have to invest in this industry. We have to nurture it. And I think in a way, public leadership and the public dialogue about the arts really needs to be heightened here, because, you know, there are many other successful arts communities in the country. And I've always said the community that puts the total package together is the community that wins. I mean, we have first-rate healthcare in this community, you know, a strong small business community, albeit been challenged, wonderful schools, and a great arts community. But I think from a public civic leadership standpoint, you know, we have to stop more often. I was reminded of this when I visited Lake Placid with my 2 daughters, and this wonderful gentleman that was part of the team that brought the 1980 Olympics to Lake Placid, and he described in a half-hour conversation how they went about doing it. And Lake Placid's not a big place, we all know that, but it was fascinating to see how they were able to bring, you know, this force of civic leadership and then state leadership to basically institutionalize, you know, a place. And Sarasota has done that, but like anything, you have to continue to work at it. And I think sometimes the public discussion here gets a little misdirected at times and bogged down. In this fast-changing world, I would argue that we ought to stay laser-focused on what it is that we're really trying to achieve to position Sarasota for the long term.
Right. Let me add this one thing. I'll pull my Manatee County card. Did you remember the number of ticket holders or subscribers to the orchestra from Manatee County?
Yeah, right now it's running about 15%. So of our total base, 15% is from Manatee County. That doesn't include all of the school work we do with the Manatee County schools, ongoing youth orchestra participation. Youth orchestra breaks about evenly, about half the students from Manatee County and half from Sarasota County.
Okay, thanks. Susan, what has to be done to maintain or improve?
Well, it's tough when you follow these two gentlemen. I think that a couple of things is just to take what they're saying from the kind of more of the philosophical and the big community dialogue is just the exposure piece. I mean, I wish there was a way that every new Sarasotan, whether it's a family or a retiree, got something when they came that gave them the opportunity to experience all of the arts. Or that as we're about to enter into No Child Left Behind, that every child in Sarasota County, with all the support of both county school systems, that you have to get people in the door first. And to me, that's the biggest barrier we all have. With arts education in many communities disappearing, many folks have not had exposure to music ed or theater or dance or classical music or anything. So I think it's that ability to create the opportunity for people to know what's really here and to get their first opportunity to try it, regardless of whatever type of art it is.
Okay, Kate, what needs to be done?
Well, there's a book some of you may have read called The Lexus and the Olive Tree. And it's about how, as we go into this highly technological age, when children go from air-conditioned homes, and all of us, to air-conditioned cars, to air-conditioned places, to where we're behind computers up to 9 hours a day, to where the attention span of a child in the 1990s was 9 seconds. Now it's 4 seconds. You can see it in commercials how fast they go. That more than ever, what we call soft touch, high tech and soft touch, the very intimacy that art gives you, the very depth of storytelling that you mentioned the word story, or you, like sitting around a campfire, that's a human need. And we have to keep that in the forefront and the mindset of the schools, of the families, of the people that come in, and of the people that are creating that. Because that's our human destiny. And all of our studies show that we can get divorced from that. So I think keeping that and the standard on the excellence.
Okay, thanks. Jay, last shot.
As Jim said, it's very complicated. I think what a lot of these people here are doing is important. The arts education, I mean, I took band and chorus, and I had to take art classes when I was growing up. And I learned to be someone who appreciates the arts. And I, in high school, discovered theater, and I lived in New Jersey. I had parents who took me to Broadway once a year when I was 11 or 12, and I fell in love with it. And not as someone who wanted to be a performer, but someone who wanted to write. I mean, I didn't even know it at the time. But this was all, accidental, sort of. But you don't know it until you're exposed to it. So all the education programs that are offered here, and they are extensive. You should go to the, EdXplore, SRQ, just to see what all the arts organizations and other cultural organizations are offering. We have superintendents who are very supportive of arts education now, and that's really important because there's going to be a generation of kids growing up who are going to have at least some exposure to programs that each of these organizations is doing. I'm concerned about the future of some of the arts because I don't see young people going to the opera as much as they should, or to the orchestra as much as they should, and not even some of the theaters. I mean, once in a while. So they have to find ways to make it possible or affordable for people who are young families or whatever to attend these things and make it part of their lives. And the crucial thing is, the Arts Alliance is working on advocacy. I sat through some of the meetings that this steering committee was having to try to create a new festival that would sort of be a counterbalance to the Ringling Festival. And I listened to some of the comments when they made their presentation to the county commissioners, and there's a lack of understanding out there among the politicians about what this arts community is. They talk about, all of a sudden now, because we've got some drive with the U.S. Air magazine insert to promote this place, there's something they can grasp onto, but they don't get it. And I think that you all do because you're here. And it comes from, the whole attitude of the community has to, rise up or come down. I'm not sure which way it's got to go, but there is something that's missing here that will lead to more accessibility, more changes, or more growth in all sorts of areas that's going to make everything better, because it's great if we get more people coming down because they're going to stay in hotels, provide more tourist tax money that's going to fund more programs, and the state's not going to do it anymore. So all these things have to come together.
Great, thanks. What good parents you had. They gave you these art classes, they took you to the theater. So, all right. I'm going to ask a couple folks some very direct questions. And James, if you would bring the mic up here. The first one I'm going to introduce is John McKay, former state senator from Bradenton. And he and I have kidded each other over the years. And when I say that he's just an old Polk County boy and a conservative politician, he actually takes that as a compliment. And it's true, right? It's true. It's true. But John has been an engineer of huge public investment in the Ringling Museum. You should also know that he is on a first-name basis with some guy named Misa, who is, I find out by extensive research, his name is Mikhail Baryshnikov. So I want to ask John just to very briefly say how a conservative politician who became the Senate president decided to push for investment in the Ringling Museum, particularly through FSU. And then the follow-up question would be, how did you decide that something like the Ringling International Art Festival would be good for the community? So, the museum, then the festival.
Well, thank you, Tom. I can't figure out how to work this, so can everybody hear me okay?
No? It's on.
You're on.
It's on. Yep.
All right, good. Maybe not.
Frank will help us.
We're on.
Thank you.
Good.
Actually, Tom, I'm more of a moderate conservative.
Well, that's true.
The way I got involved in the Ringling was when I was in the Senate. It was in terrible state of disrepair, and it's quite obvious that it's a tremendous asset to the state. It is the State Museum of Florida, and so we were going down a path where the financial challenges were not quite as bad as these folks. Are describing that they are today, but they were getting increasingly challenging for the arts community. And so it was obvious to two gentlemen in particular, Bob Blaylock from Braden and Bob Johnson from Sarasota, that we need to do something to save the museum, to put it on a track where it wouldn't have these challenges, financial challenges in the future. And so they came up with the idea that it ought to be the governance control for the museum should be shifted to one of the universities in the state. The governance had previously been in a number of locations, so moving it to university was not as far-fetched as some might have imagined. In fact, initially, when Ringling gave it to the state, it was under what was then called the Board of Control, which was the forerunner of the Board of Regents, which is the forerunner of the Board of Governors that runs the state university system today. So we asked for University of South Florida that has a presence here and FSU to give us a proposal. It turned out that for a variety of reasons, FSU's was much better, and it was, we probably should have realized that in the first place, because just as the University of Florida runs most of the agricultural programs in the university system in the state, Florida State University has the most outstanding cultural program, so it was really a natural fit. We first transferred it. That gave us a number of benefits, not the least of which is what's called the matching grant, Portales Matching Grant Program, which means if you give $1 million and the state matches that, so you get $2 million and you get 100% instant return on your money. There are a few hundred million behind these days, but hopefully they'll catch up at some point. And after we put it under Florida State University, we appropriated the next 2 years after that about $50 million to restore and expand the museum to its current condition. overall, that period of time is probably closer to a little bit more than that, maybe $75 million or so.
So what's the return? I mean, where do you see the economic return? I mean, you've mentioned to me that this is good business for the community to invest in the Ringling and other arts facilities.
I think what these folks said was all correct. It's a major employer, one of the major employers in our area. There was a study done a few years ago that said that that our arts community has the third highest per capita employment in the arts of any community in the country, which outside of Broadway and outside of New York, and that's rather surprising. So what we wanted to do, or what I wanted to do, was to create the Ringling International Art Festival that would bring more people here at a time when they otherwise wouldn't come. And so I had because I don't know anything about the arts, I really don't. I had this rudimentary idea, and a friend of mine introduced us to Mikhail Baryshnikov, and fortunately Governor Chris thought that was a good idea, and so we got a little money. And it's been successful so far. We've had it for 3 years. We're going to have a fourth year in 2012 with Stephen High's help and FSU's help and your help too. And I think it will continue to drive people here at times they otherwise might not come. And that keeps people employed.
Great.
That's what we need.
So what's he like?
He's an intense golfer.
All right, thank you, John. I appreciate that. One more, Gabrielle Slater. Where are you? Gabrielle is actually a very capable, she's a stand-in, but a very capable stand-in. She's a member of the Sarasota Young Professionals Group, and they have launched some initiatives to try to engage young professionals in the arts. So you can just give us a snapshot of where you see your group heading and what you're trying to accomplish.
Well, I can tell you what I think about youth in the arts in Sarasota. And I think that we can all agree as an audience that the various wonderful art organizations in this town have done so much for education in the youth. And I think that is an incredibly strong point in all of your organizations and something to really be admired by us all. However, I think the problem lies with people in my age range, the young professionals, how to keep the young creative artists around. And I think it was incredibly interesting what was said about whether or not it's easy to be an artist in Sarasota. And I really learned something today, because to me, I thought that it was impossible. Because all the young artists I know, they seem to just feel like they can't be connected with the older community somehow. Like maybe they're artists too contemporary or different. You know, I look around and I don't see a lot of young people here, and I think it's too bad, because this town is filled with young, talented artists from Ringling, New College, even independent people just growing up here who are talented. And I think it's also very interesting what you said about theater being a contemporary voice of the people. Maybe some of these young artists feel that their work is a little bit too contemporary to be taken seriously here in Sarasota. And finally, I'm going to just explain something that famous poet T.S. Eliot said about art as a tradition. He explained that the tradition is a living, moving, growing organism, and each new artist that comes into it is no less or worse than the one before him. And I think that it's important for us to look at these young artists and maybe their contemporary or different work and understand that they're still in the artistic tradition, and they should be taken seriously, even though maybe their work is a little bit different than what anybody understands. So I think the most important thing is to try and build a bridge between the younger community and the older community of artists here in Sarasota, and try and incorporate them more into each other's lives.
Great, thank you very much. You know, I'd asked Frank Maggio of YPG if he wanted to show up, but I think he sent a ringer, actually. That was good. Okay, now it's time to turn it over to the floor. We only ask that you state your name. There's a high premium on questions, a lower premium on sermons. You could get those on Sunday or whatever if you wish. So, right here in the front row, we'll bring you a microphone. Can you just give us your name?
My name is Ellen Asmussen, and I'm from Denmark, or we spend half of the year in Denmark, and I just wanted to say that in Denmark, there is nothing like a private sponsor. All the arts are paid for by the state. But on the other hand, I, as a college professor paid up to 84% in tax. So that's the other side of it. I have
John's shaking right now. Okay.
I have one specific point for the Florida Theater. May I present that?
Sure.
And then I have a suggestion.
Okay,
It's not
go.
a sermon. I was wondering, on Sunday we saw my husband, who's a jazz musician, and I saw Next to Normal, which we loved for many reasons. I could give a sermon on that. But a musical comedy about the bipolar illness. Why? You talked about dialogue so much. Why didn't one have the possibility of a dialogue after the performance? Because people who I happen to know, were coming up to us and talking about people they knew or people in their family who were bipolar and how.
Great question. Thank you.
You are absolutely right, and we're seeing that with the audience. There are 2 scheduled, and there's an online discussion as well that's both national and local. So I think because of the sensitivity of the issues and the kind of professionals that we need in the audience for that kind of discussion, because so many people have had that experience, is why we could not garner enough people to do it every night. But there are 2 coming up.
And they're on the
you'll
website?
Get information.
The date's on the website, your website?
It should be.
You
I've
think?
got our.
Okay, good.
And there is an online discussion you can go, and I hope that you go and participate.
All right, just very quickly.
Okay, very quickly, a suggestion. My husband and I have been on the historical trolley, and as jazz people, we've been on the jazz trolley during Jazz Festival. What about an arts trolley, where, I know it sounds complicated, but where you get lots of people who don't know much about Sarasota to see scenes from various art genres and get an impression.
All right, you want to round that up, Jim?
I'll round that up. Well, that is a very good suggestion, and it's one that we definitely are looking at. There are various versions of that take place. There are a lot of behind-the-scene tours, but one of the things that, as a group, the board and the Alliance are looking at are a suggestion exactly like that, some sort of, whether it's a trolley or an experience that could allow people who are here full-time or visiting to get a better look at the arts. And it's something that we're trying to put together as quickly as we can. It's a great suggestion because it's a wonderful tour.
Yeah, great. Is that Jonette? All right, actually I'm going to ask you a question very quickly, and just give us a snapshot version because, as I mentioned, as a Manatee native, I feel neglected sometimes. What is Bradenton doing specifically to try to connect the dots between its arts organizations?
Well, I think Bradenton is incredibly fortunate that we're only a short drive away from FST, Sarasota Opera, and Sarasota Orchestra. And certainly, I think you could have a bigger market share up there. But I will have to tell you that I just work with the cultural arts and history organizations in downtown Bradenton. And we are truly at a crossroads, and we're at a crossroads because of the civic leadership. The Arts, Culture, and Heritage in downtown Bradenton sits every month with the EDC, the Convention and Visitors Bureau, the Chamber of Commerce, the City of Bradenton, and the county. And we came out of a full-year cultural planning process that was to merge cultural and economic development. In fact, I'm in Senator McKay's office every week because as a result, because we believe the arts are stronger when we work together as a group, and I work weekly with 8 cultural organizations in downtown Bradenton, and because of that, the city has a paid public arts coordinator. They fund Realize Bradenton. We have a $6.5 million investment in the Riverwalk. We have the historic Pink Palace, Manatee River Hotel. I'm at the table with arts and culture on form-based code. We help promote our local retail. We've got 3 new restaurants downtown. And I think it's quite significant out of a community planning process that 10-year master plan, one of the 6 and most important strategies is collaboration. And it's something that I see increasingly happening in Sarasota. And Realize Bradenton is a nonprofit, and we are actually set up to build community and promote economic development by working together. And we do have the Market Mamas. We're probably one of the few cultural organizations that run a farmer's market. So we bring arts to the market. At our table sits the Pittsburgh Pirates. So we have cultural arts night at the Pirates. I'd love to have a random act of culture of the opera at a pirate game. And it's why our operating budget is probably doubled by the funds we get from the Knight Foundation, because they as a Knight Foundation community, they do fund the use of arts for cultural development and civic development. So we've got great civic leaders, right, John, in downtown Bradenton, and they really do increasingly understand arts, culture, and heritage and how we're building the quality of place.
Great, thank you very much. Plus, you can stop in and see Snooty before it's too late. That's right downtown. Well, no, Snooty's like 63 or something, right? Okay, yes, right in the corner.
I'm Elsie Souza, and I'm a downtown resident of Sarasota. And I want to speak specifically to FST and to the opera. They are major, major players in downtown. They're our neighbors and our friends. And if FST did not keep all those buildings going and what they have planned for the future, downtown Sarasota would not be so vibrant. And as far as my neighbor and friend Susan at the Opera House, I mean, we're talking a major catalyst in downtown where it's used all year round and maintains a high quality of excellence. And you know how difficult it is in this day and age to keep downtowns vibrant. And I have to tell you that FST and the opera are great neighbors.
All right, thank you.
Thank you.
I think, looks like Norm.
Yeah, hi, Norm Olshansky. I'm with the Van Wezel Foundation, and I do have a question.
Sure, perfect.
Aside from the obvious, which is more financial resources, if you could wave a magic wand, what would you want to see happen that would improve the arts and culture community in our area?
Great, thanks. Anybody? Wave the wand. Buildings, support.
Well, I want to say a $12 million endowment, because I think the arts have been behind the symphonies. You know, you guys were way ahead of it. And in order for us to have longevity, we all do need endowments, and we need to have that secure in place. We also need a mindset, as somebody was saying, which is so good with our commissioners, that art isn't this elite extra activity that people do for pleasure. It's integral to our lives. So we need that as a center point that I think with our commissioners and all of our leaders that we all pressure and say we need it. It's imperative, not just and not as just entertainment. It's for our lives, and not just to create audiences for the future, but for children that are there now and need it now. So I think that mindset, that endowment, and then more accessibility. We do need to get the people that are going to the fairs, the people that are going to the downtown parade, they need to be coming to the theaters. It's got to be more than 10% of the audience. We need all access points for everybody in Sarasota.
All right. Joe, specifically, do you need your own house?
I would say two things. Selfishly, for the orchestra, its own performance space. You know, when a violinist plays a Stradivarius, there's an incredible relationship between that instrument and that performer. The same is true between an entire group of musicians that play in a specific space. I use the Nashville Symphony as an example. In 1998, the Nashville Symphony filed for bankruptcy. 10 years later, they came out of that, they were stronger, and they built a $125 million concert hall, and it's changed the landscape of the city. They had auditions for principal oboe in Nashville about 6 months ago. They had 300 applicants, and the winner was from Hong Kong. And it dramatically changed the organization. So the orchestra, which has grown in such a way where it needs the flexibility and the autonomy to deliver those performances, it's a vital need. I couldn't agree more with building endowment, and I'll just make the point in terms of general overarching for the community. Strengthening the endowment of an organization is critical. In an age where we've seen subscribers shrink and more people buying single tickets, the ability for a cultural organization to take risks comes in large part from how big its subscriber base is, because they pay in advance. They don't wait for the ad or the radio announcement. and then have a call to action to buy a ticket. So if everybody is not a subscriber anymore, and patterns and lifestyles have changed that, the ability for every organization in the city to be able to map its season and take artistic risk is going to be circumscribed by the strength of its endowment. So I like to think where we used to say subscribers financed our risk for a future season, increasingly more so with the way single tickets are purchased and subscribers have shrunk, it's going to be the endowment that allows this community to be culturally vibrant and interesting going forward.
Right. Susan, you're nodding your head in agreement?
Absolutely. Norm did say non-cash items, and it is a cash item, but nonetheless, we're all in the same place. We all need the stability of an endowment. And then I'll just say with my tongue firmly planted in my cheek, no hurricanes, because for those of us who have buildings, even if they are Miami-Dade compliant, we all do have risk in terms of, I try to explain to my staff, if the theater gets knocked over, we're all out of jobs. And then the other thing is that it gets cold up in the north sooner, because then everybody comes sooner, and we all fill our early seats. So I think both of those things are very important.
Perfect.
Can't control them, but.
Good. Jim?
I do have one comment, Norm, and I think the question's a very good one. And what I would wish for is that we could take all of our individual voices, and I talk to many of you and lots more every day, and make that unified statement that we believe that this community should become. We are, this powerful force for the arts. The arts are a major economic driver in our community, and the only way that we're going to get action toward more support in a lot of directions is for us to say that as a unified voice. And I think in the past we've done that sometimes, and sometimes we haven't. We all get so busy all the time when we're out there doing things. But the Alliance is a perfect place for that to happen. Is to be able to make that statement, and we talk a lot of times that my job is to be at the table when they can't be there, to be that voice. But it also represents you, and your voice is what represents what happens to them. So I think if we could bring ourselves to make these unified statements and say them loudly and say them in an organized way, we can affect change. I think we can certainly do that.
Jay?
Dreaming, there was a place a few years ago called the Backlot Theater, which opened, and Mark Marvel opened it, and I didn't really understand what he was trying to do until he started doing it. And he created a place where young people, old people, all sorts of artists could come and have a place to try out something. And I wish there was a place like that where young people would have a place to try, anybody would have a place to try something. I have long wished that FST would open its doors to the cabaret on nights that it's not performing, and maybe run classes for local performers, community theater people, to learn how to do cabaret shows, to learn how to be a performer, in that kind of venue. We have all these resources, and I like to see them being used more.
And to that, Jay, and to your point from the young folks, because I spend a lot of time meeting with all the above, probably once a month at least, maybe 2 to 3 times some months, I get some artist, some group of artists, some performer coming in saying, can you really help us find a place where we can practice, where we can meet, where we can congregate? We have several great venues, but we really do not have an artistic place where this type of gathering can take place. And I think that would really be a unifying factor that could involve a lot of younger people and a lot of those people who are out there with various talents that we could develop. And I hear that from the public a lot.
All right, great question. And I think we should give Norm and his folks at the Van Wezel Foundation a little shout out for working on this effort for the Hearing Loop projects in our community. Excellent work. And that's another accessibility issue. We've got this weird thing with, we want to get young people in there, but a lot of older people or people with hearing problems were not able to access theaters well, and so it's kind of this weird thing. Yes, ma'am, right there. And then we'll have time for about one more after you.
Hello. My name is Catherine Chesley, and I am an art supporter. And my husband and I are artists as well. My question is, and I'm so glad that you all got down to this as your wrap-up. My question is, what can your organization do to get the arts back into the schools? I know you're doing a lot of pull-out programs, you know, you're pulling people out, but it really happens down in the school. You brought your blue ribbon from that classroom, and you still have it. And a lot of us have those moments that started in those schools, and I think we're missing it. We've got hundreds of students here who are very interested in what happens, or sometimes they don't even know they're interested because they haven't been exposed to it. Sure. So what could your organization do to make sure that things are back into the schools? The newspaper, you're looking for a place to have an arts organization do something. There's an auditorium at every school, okay? The newspaper always publishes a lot of things that happen in the sports pages. Well, I'd like to know what musicals are going on, you know? So what could happen, what could you do for the schools?
All right. Yes.
Well, we're seeing 55,000 children a year. And I don't mean it as an applause, I think it's a mandatory belief in that. And I love when professional organizations go into schools, I have to tell you. I respect arts in the schools, but when you get a real violinist going in and a real opera singer, I think we have an amazing opportunity in this city to do something that no city's done. And that is, with these organizations, for us to impact the children is extraordinary. So all of us have substantial programs, and I think they need to be fortified as actual music teachers and art teachers may be leaving. There's not been theater in schools. And when it has been, it's not theater. And I want to make that clear. There's this big difference between dress up and theater. Dress up means I get to put on my mom's dress and I'm in the holiday show and it's really fun, or the Easter thing, or I remember my kids' show at Christmas time. I am so poor I have nothing to give the baby Jesus in the manger. That was my line. But that's not theater. Theater is an investigation.
I thought it was pretty good theater right now, actually.
Did I do it really well?
I thought it was good.
I could do it again.
I'm kind of a little choked
I'm getting my
up.
third grade one as well. Theater is an investigation of the self, and the artist can take you there. So we can take a little child and say, what is it like when you're lonely? What is it like when your best friend moves away? And take them in an artistic experience that says, what theater does, what is it like to be alive? So, yes, I can't speak for anyone else, but I think we all reach in, but I think we have an amazing opportunity, if we are going to move this city to even further, is to take a huge impact. And right now, with any given child, we're in a fact-gathering mission with all of the organizations on seeing what the schools, what the businesses, what the arts counts, what everyone wants and needs and thinks about.
Joe, just real briefly, we just have about a minute left. Tell us about the symphony's curriculum in the two school districts, Manatee and Sarasota County.
One of the things that the orchestra does is each August we bring together educators from Manatee County and Sarasota County. We bring them together in a workshop and we produce a curriculum guide so that every 4th and or 5th grader in Manatee and Sarasota County can come to a live performance at the Van Wezel. And in many cases, it's their first experience in a live orchestral setting. What's fabulous about it is that study guide, we do a workshop shortly after the school districts commence their school years, where our staff goes in and works with the music teachers, and that curriculum guide actually becomes essentially nearly 25 to 30 lesson plans that the teachers can then use all through the year to help build appreciation, insight, and awareness that ultimately culminates in the kids' experience when they come to the concert. So we've done a lot of work in that area. I started my career as a public school music teacher, so I am very synergistic to your comments. What's very interesting from a public policy standpoint, and it's increasingly more so with the way lifestyles and technology and all those things have changed our life, most kids in Florida schools won't have the opportunity through the standard public school district to actually have access to an instrument until the 6th grade. Now, when I student taught in upstate New York, and however many years ago that was, kids could start in 3rd grade. And when you look at what's happened from over the last 20 years, by a time the child's in 6th grade, their world is so much more expanded and vast and large than it was 20 years ago. So that's a public policy question. If it's really important, and we think it's important to build complete people, that have a cultural awareness and an aptitude for the arts and helps them to do what they do every day and enrich their lives. That's a public policy question, and I know that our school superintendents here locally are supportive of that, but they have the reality of the budget. But I can't think enough about it. When I was in Boston, I worked in an inner-city program. The worst part of the city, where I worked with young boys between, I don't know, 10 and 18. When we started a music program with this tutorial program, we saw these kids' lives change. Not by a little bit, but by a lot. So there's no bigger advocate for the question that you've raised than that which it entails than I am. But we're all doing it well. The opera does it well. All the organizations do it. It's just, but it does come down to public policy. What's important?
Great answer. Unless there's anybody who has any compelling things to end, we will wrap up here. The first order of business is to thank Jay, Kate, Susan, Joe, and Jim. Busy folks, great job.
I'll be very brief, and I don't want to sound like a suck-up with my bosses here. But on the back of your programs, there's a page talking about Arts Sarasota, and I'm hoping that you all know that we have started a website focused on the arts. My colleagues Susan and Carrie and I and some other colleagues are killing ourselves, churning out stories that you're not seeing in the daily paper right away as fast as we're putting them out there. And of course, we want you to come visit because we want higher numbers. But we want you to know how much we're covering, what's going on here, and to reinforce what Diane said before, that we're very lucky that we have an arts staff. As the chairman of the Theater Critics Association, I am the only full-time theater critic on my board. And when I was first elected, my first time around 15 years ago, there was only one person who was a freelancer. So the world is, Carrie as a dance critic, and there are very few full-time dance critics around anymore. We're very lucky here. And so go look at our site and see what we're doing, and tell your friends, because we want you to read what we're writing, because we don't want it just going out there. So
yeah, great point. And don't forget, the lobby will be open. I think just about everybody's going to stick around a little bit. If you didn't get your copy, or if you want an extra copy of this magazine, you can pick it up at the end. Thanks to everybody. Thanks for coming. Good night.